Does the scrolling thing make you anxious?
What scrolling thing?
Like this.
Oh, no.
So, I'll do a proper intro and everything.
Totally.
Before, like this part of it. I'm
Okay.
gonna cut all this random babbling out too, but.
You don't love this part? This isn't the part of the...
I mean, we can keep it. Maybe I'll keep it. Depends on how it sounds. So, you just took me through a workout at your gym.
I did.
And I'm still like trying to catch my bearings in my brain. And
Yeah.
I'm just sitting in this position. I'm like still shaking.
Yeah.
Like setting up the podcast equipment. I had you look at me because I was like
Shaking a little bit,
like
man.
straight shaking.
Yeah.
And I was really curious. Like I was just telling one of the people here, we're at Wine Lab in Blacksburg. I'm kind of like scarfing on Boyer's podcasting spot.
Yeah, you
AKA
are.
the Plaid Avenger, AKA like the wine savant of Blacksburg, like this cat.
And it's a pretty dope like space too.
It's
like,
beautiful. It's beautiful. Like looking at the framing, I was like,
we have
oh yeah,
beautiful like France behind us.
yeah. And the people that work here brought us like, some lovely little flowers in a beaker.
They did.
Which was really cool. But the workout really kind of cooked me. And I was thinking about this on the way to the gym this morning because like 2 or 3 years ago, just knowing you, so like I said, I'll intro this in the beginning, but you know, we worked together for a couple years, and when I first met you, you were not a fitness dude.
No.
And now, like, if you look at Clint's Instagram, which will be tagged in the show notes, like, dude, shredded. Like, you went from like just being a dude who teaches English to now you're just like super into fitness. So like, was there a moment that you were like, I gotta do something? Or I'm still shaking, look at my hands, I'm like, my whole body is shaking from the workout. But did you get to a point, was it like a thing, or were you just like this gradual progression of getting into it?
No, so around it actually is pretty synonymous with me coming out.
Okay.
So about 2 years ago, I was like, I need to get back into like kind of working out, like seeing what it is. So I just got a membership at like Planet Fitness, and I would go like once or twice like a week, like not even anything like regular. Then in January.
Did you have the mind of how to be able to find to do a workout, just showing up at a Planet Fitness?
No, it was mostly like cardio, and then I'd kind of watch what other people would do. But then in
you're just like prowling around the gym, like
what is it?
What
January
are they doing?
2020. Yeah,
okay.
January 2020 is when one of my sister's best friend's husband texted me and was like, "Dude, I'm starting this Superman program by Dr. Jim Stamani, this like fitness expert.
Okay.
Let's do Planet Fitness. Like, I'll meet you at the gym at 7 or 8 o'clock every night, like, and we'll do it together." So we started doing that, and I like fell in love with the learning about supersetting, learning about how to pair stuff in the strength industry, how to work on like your joints and all of that. And then of course COVID happened. COVID happened, and we were all like, well, what are we gonna do? So I partnered with this other guy who was doing the workouts with us, but he has a more HIIT background. And so we would go outside every day around 9:30. We went to Lane Stadium, we went to a park, went to the fitness park at Virginia Tech, and we would just come up with our own workouts that were a mixture of HIIT and strength, and we would do that. And then he ended up moving back up to Nova, and I was like, I've got to keep moving. I've got to keep something consistent.
You get hooked on it.
Yeah,
especially
you do.
The HIIT stuff. Like this morning when I was going through it, I was like, I remember this sensation of I can't go anymore, but then just doing a couple more reps.
You just got to keep going,
And when you get out of that, like I do, even though my body right now is feeling like shaky and like not very strong, like there is like this sense of clarity and euphoria that comes from really challenging metabolic conditioning, HIIT workouts.
Yeah.
So like you were hooked. You got hooked on it, and like this dude bounces, and then what?
Yeah, so this dude bounced, and I had an old professor friend who invited me to come work out with her. Went to Peak for like the first week and like died. Like
I was there.
Died.
I did that. That was me this morning.
And I mean, it's my 9:30 class is the normal one I go to, and you're in there with all of these just housewives, and these women are beasts. And to be around that,
and you're like in that network now. Like I see on your Instagram,
now I'm, like,
you're like going to like pool parties and stuff. Like
yeah, I am. So. I'll never forget when I first got there, I was so nervous, and because these women had been there since Peak Open, which was like 3 or 4 years ago. And so the fitness instructor was like, what type of music are y'all into today? And she was like, how do y'all feel about girl power? And like no one really said anything, and I like just stepped up and I was like, hell yeah, let's do some girl power music. And they like have been obsessed with
They're
me
like,
ever since.
that guy, I like him.
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, ever since then, I've gone pretty much like every day in
Really?
some capacity. Like, I mean, there are definitely days where I go and I focus more on like the mobility, prehab, rehab type stuff versus like throwing myself into like the fitness washing machine and like dying.
It's crazy, man. Like, it's interesting because the reason I asked that is because so many people, they start on that path of like, oh, I'll go to Planet Fitness a couple times, and then they just keep paying a membership for 10 or 12 months before they cancel it because they realize they haven't been going. It's pretty rare that people actually like follow through with that sort of thing.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I realize that I'm super competitive.
Yeah.
And so I always used to like to work out by myself. And now that I'm in this group, like I get so competitive with them.
Yeah.
In the gym when we're doing the workouts, like I don't.
It's totally different when you're in a group of people doing a thing. That's one of the things I say about yoga. Like, and we were just talking to Cassie, who's here with us in the Wine Lab, it's like it's completely different doing an online class versus doing a class with people. Yeah. Breath and movement, like it's completely different.
Yeah, and I remember during COVID, every once in a while I would log into your online yoga stuff, but it is so much different.
It's like you're watching a thing, you know, instead of experiencing a thing. Yeah. You know, so. And I think that's one distinct thing about the peak style, like their modality of like, here's some people, here's a workout, you can do whatever you want. Like I didn't quite know what to expect. So coming in this morning, I was thinking in a yoga way where it's like there's an instructor in the front, here's a row of mats, and we're all doing the same thing at the same time. But what I appreciated about it was like, here's the workout, you want to do it, you can do it. And the instructor was there, and he gave me a couple tips on a few different things.
And he's not going to let you have bad form.
And his name was Chris, right? Curtis. And he gave me a couple tips on a few things like that I wasn't sure about, but it was super like casual, but still like created a sense of like we're working towards fitness. You know what I mean? Yeah. Which is really cool. I'd love to be in that space because, you know, maybe because it's, you know, Saturday morning, you know, it wasn't super packed, but I would love to be in there when there's like 10, 15 people.
And it's such an interesting place to work out too, because each of the trainers have a different background, right? You have Jen Miller, who is like
I love Jen. Shouts out to the homie Jen.
Yeah, she's like a yoga like superstar, right, in the community. And then you have someone like Curtis, whose background is military, and so his stuff is very like, I mean, he has a background in just strict like powerlifting, and so he comes from that. And then we have another trainer,
but he had some really good calisthenic movements,
God,
which were really bonkers, like seeing some of his movements.
And then we
really
have
cool.
a woman like Paige, who leads our Metcons on Tuesday and Thursdays, and she's the one that really brought Knees Over Toes to peak back in January. And so she's really big into the prehab rehab stuff and making sure that all of your joints and
the Knees Over Toes thing, I want to do more learning about it, because it seems like this, like if you go online and you go to Instagram and you just search Knees Over Toes guy, you'll see like all of his videos and his thesis, and he kind of lays it out. And having gone through yoga training, like we were talking about this at the gym, like I'm coming to a new understanding of what Knees Over Toes means. Yeah. But I haven't corroborated his thesis with other like understandings and anatomy and other teachers teaching
he
those
has
sorts
like a
of
whole
things.
like,
because in the yoga world it's very much like if your knee goes past your toes, you're gonna blow it out, and then you'll die, and I'm sure you'll go bankrupt, and everyone will leave you, and it's like it's the worst thing ever. He has a whole like stretch series that we always do either before or after class, like that's supposed to take like a good like 20 minutes. One of my good friends, Gemma, who works out with me, and she runs like 20 miles like every other day, and she started doing it and like saved her running because of how long distance she is. Intuitively it makes sense, like you should just like your knees are designed to go past your toes. I just need to learn more about it, you know, and I want to start bringing that into my yoga teaching if I learn enough about it and know that it's safe. I mean, you see so many people that come into a yoga room and their knees are like a real thing for people. People have like really wonky knees. This has turned into a fitness podcast. I never really talk about fitness, but like it's on my mind. And so you brought up so the fitness thing was just sort of like you trickled your way into it, but you said it correlated with you coming out, and I was actually curious about that because especially as a public school teacher, I see all these kids that like they're like kind of playing with the idea of expressing like that this is their experience, and you, from having like brief conversations previously, like you came out later in life, like it wasn't like a middle high school kind of thing.
Oh God, no.
And so I mean, maybe if you want to talk about that and you maybe tell that story, but one of the specific things that I was curious about was when people have these huge choices that they make in order to either express themselves or to make a life change. Oftentimes there's an event associated with it. And was it so like your fitness thing, like you sort of trickled your way into that? Do you feel that you trickled your way into coming out, or were you like?
Dude, it was the weirdest thing to come out, especially this late in life. Like, I knew since I was like in elementary and middle school, and of course, like.
And you came out when you I came after I knew you.
23 or 24. So like super late. Like, so there was so much internalized homophobia that was happening from where I grew up, like Southern Baptist, and just in a very conservative area, and so never once thought. In a million years, when I was in middle high school and even early college, never thought that I could ever come out.
You could do it.
And if anyone did find out, like I would think that I would have to kill myself. Like that's how extreme all of that was. And so it created a lot of depression, a lot of I had an eating disorder in college, and so finally, when I did, the first person I ever came out with to was actually my colleague Misty Lester.
Shouts out to Misty.
Yeah, she was my cooperating teacher, and then we became like best friends. And so we were at McAdoo's one day, and so finally we just kind of like slowly, and it was like one of those things is like, well, I guess I could maybe see myself like dating a guy, and then slowly over time I was like, no, Clint, like you're just gay.
You're gay, dude. You're gay.
And so when you came out, when I came out, like there was this moment of like, okay, now you can love yourself, right? And when you think about loving yourself, I think being comfortable with the skin you're in, right? And I think for so long I was uncomfortable in the skin I was in because I didn't really care about myself very much, right? I always had this like out plan of like, shit, like if things go sideways, then...
Sideways being people like figuring out that you're gay.
Yeah. And so it was very much okay, this is your time to self-love yourself. Now let's self-love your body that you're in.
Now let's get shredded, bro.
And I'm not saying like, if people are comfortable in whatever they look like, that's fine.
Yeah, 100%.
It doesn't have to be like a 4-pack of abs. To me, it's not even about abs or having big arms. It's just, I know the mental fortitude that happens after I go to the gym and how confident I feel after, and how much that translates into me throughout the day, projecting this love that I try to project into the universe as much as I can.
And it's the time dedicated to whatever your practice is, and it's not necessarily the outcomes. Like I talk about this in a yoga context all the time. It's like, you look around a yoga room and someone has their foot behind their head, and you're like, why don't I have my foot behind my head? And then you go to like a gym where people are lifting. It's like, well, like Curtis today, like his arms look great.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? His arms look great. And then I look at my arms, right? And I still have these things that I'm working with. Do you know what I mean? Like even with all the practices that I have, I'm still thinking, I want my arms to look like
well,
that.
It's that fundamental part of like how we as humans should progress through life. Like you should be able to find something and be like, hey, I want to focus on that skill and I want to get better at it. And I want to do something that even is small to better myself. Like during COVID, could never do a headstand, could never even think about holding like a 2-second like handstand. Forearm press was never, and it's been a year now, and I can kind of do all of those things. And it just is one of those things that like, it's not too late in life. Like you can figure out how to do these things for you, and you're going to feel really badass when you do start getting these concepts.
And in a big way, I think it's just the time into it. And so like, there's like the achievement oriented mindset of like, I want to be able to do a press forearm stand, right? Or I want to have arms like Curtis, or like whatever it is. Like there is an aspect of that, but I think the more important thing to consider is that I have taken this time to take care of myself. And back to the conversation that you brought up, which is like that self-love, like that thing of like, we're all out here living our lives, working in the world. You and I are teachers. I mean, you just went back to school, which I'd love to talk about that in a second. But, we go do our work, and it's all about like giving and working and like trying to share something with people. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening. It's like your job is either to like support you and a family or support yourself, or your job is like working to contribute to your community, and we don't take the time for ourselves.
That's a really interesting thing to think about too. It's like there's a lot of privilege that comes into the fact that I can go to the gym at 9:30, go pay my subscription. I have financial support to be able to eat healthy
and able-bodied.
Like all of these things are factors that go into just the ableism that comes around being able to live that type of fit lifestyle, or being able to do those things, right?
And it's like finding whatever it is that time, right? So it could be journaling, it could be breath, meditation, it could be, walking in nature, sitting on a bench,
We try to get like one thing, right? We're like, okay, like, Aaron, like the rest of your like life, you just like do your yoga. That's like your thing. That's gonna be your like passion. But I think there's such a cool thing of like, fitness is over here for me, right? And it's fun, but like that's not my creative side. Like I have to paint and write poetry over here to get that.
I didn't know you painted. I know you do poetry, but
I'm self-taught, so I don't paint well. But but it's a very like creative process for me to be able to look at a blank canvas and to see all the colors like come together.
And that's just another iteration of self-love. Right?
Yeah.
It's just another like using that as a form of expression,
100%.
as a form of like loving you and like loving your thoughts and like what you're up to.
And I think we have this huge culture of like we constantly need to be around other things and other people, and I'm like I'll go to like the river by myself and like sit down there and have a glass of wine, or I'll go to I'll go like on a mini hike by myself. Like I think there's a lot of health that goes into alone time and feeling like, hey, there's a live band, and instead of feeling the pressure of like texting everyone and then people giving you these excuses of why they can't come, like, dude, if you want to just go to the band, go to the band.
Just go
like,
to the band.
That's like that's badass.
You don't
like,
need,
and so I think learning that part about myself too, that I can be comfortable doing things alone, really has helped me out tremendously when it comes to like the social pressures.
You think were you behaving that way 5 years ago?
Oh God, no. I would never go anywhere 5 years ago by myself.
Really?
Yeah. Now, like if I want to, I mean, granted, I know this community and I'm comfortable in this community, and a lot of people know me, so oftentimes when I do go out...
No need to brag, but...
Oftentimes when I do go out, like I'll bring like my poetry, or I'll bring something to write, and I'll sit down or have a glass of wine or coffee or whatever, and I'll see people that I know and we'll talk to each other, but as far as like constantly feeling the pressure of like, oh my God, I have to have someone going out with me to do these things, like...
Yeah, I like that idea. I think that's good. I think it's a good lesson for people to kind of take up. And I think also like the story of like this wasn't your experience for a majority of your life.
Oh, 100%.
This was not you.
Yeah.
This isn't how you behaved. And then you like flip switch and you're like, actually, I should be doing things by myself. I should take myself and go do things and value my body, value my mind, value my creativity.
Yeah.
I love that. Were you writing poetry before? So as an English teacher, were you into literature and poetry prior to, and then you were like, let me become an English teacher because I think that's something I want to share, or?
So ever since my grandma passed away in 9th grade, and I got super depressed after she passed away. She was like my like role model like throughout life or whatever. And so in junior year in high school, that's when I started writing poetry. But when I tell you this poetry is like so bad, it's pretty rough. It is pretty rough.
Do you still have any of those notebooks?
Oh, 100%.
Oh my God, I have all my notebooks too. And I never look at them because it's just like,
I'm mortified.
It would be fun to just like be able to anonymize myself and share that with people. Do you know what I mean? Just so they can see it as an exemplar of like, this is how teenage minds work.
Yeah,
you know?
I've even thought about like at some point in my academia career going back and almost treating my my poetry like as a case study, and really going back and being like, listen, this is a 15-year-old kid who was in the closet, who was severely depressed because of his grandmother, who did not feel comfortable in his own skin, who was just sexually assaulted, like all of these things. That would be so interesting to look back at some of that poetry and being like,
see, like
even though it's bad poetry, but just a bit like analyze like, what was this kid like really thinking?
The word choice, like all those things. It's probably like super hyperbolic and like extremely dramatic and no subtlety.
No,
like good poetry is like good poetry can be, it's so intentionally ambiguous that it can be interpreted in a way, it's like the postmodern idea of like, we can look at this however we want to look at this, right? This is a thing that's independent of the author, independent of society. This is like my interpretation. That's like, as I would define postmodernism. And like good poetry allows you to like blanket your interpretations, your experience, your understanding, conceptions of interpersonal dynamics and society. And a 13-year-old's poetry does not do that.
No. No. Oh my God, it was bad, man. But that's why I love poetry. It's the fragmentation, right? It's the lack of structure. It's the lack of rules. I never felt like I was a good writer all through like growing up.
Okay.
In fact, like grammar rules didn't even stick with me until like halfway through college. Like, and then one day I was just like, I understand it. Like
that was my experience too.
I was like, I understand it.
That was my exact experience.
Even when teaching grammar, I'm like, it is what it is. Like you're gonna get it one day, and it's gonna come from you analyzing your own writing. Because that's when I learned so much. Is when I did my independent study with Catherine Graham at Virginia Tech on a fairy tale project, and she would sit down with me like once a month, and we would go through, and she would be marking up my paper in sentence by sentence, and I was like, oh, like I totally understand why you need a comma there, or why you need a semicolon there, or like word choice. So I think it just comes naturally eventually.
Grammar is this interesting thing that's like almost independent of, so like we have our vernaculars that we, and like the colloquialisms and like the way that we just talk with people. We have standard English, and then we have grammar, right? And so like you can look at a scientific article or even like some really like formal prose, and like that's extremely standard English grammar style. And then we have the way that we speak. Like I just showed my kids a poem by Jamila Lyscott called 3 Ways to Speak English.
Oh yeah.
You know that one?
Yeah. Did she ever write that like in Word, or did you show them the spoken word?
I showed them the spoken word, but I pulled the transcript because it was a TED Talk, so I just pulled the transcript and like put it together.
That poem.
Dude, she did.
Immaculate.
I love it. And then I tied it in with like some other stuff that we were doing, but like the punchline of that I wanted the kids to get is like, we just speak how we speak, and like there are rules within these structures. And so from my experience, I can talk about how, and probably your experience too, being from the country, because I'm from the country too, like you know, we say y'all because we don't have you plural, right? It's actually a sophistication on the language, right? It's not some sort of bastardization of the language. So we have that, and then on top of that, we have grammar, which I think is almost independent of the three. If you think about like Noam Chomsky's idea of universal grammar, and so like you have this. So we went from fitness to like Chomsky. It's impressive.
This is like my whole
this is impressive.
Life. Yeah, I'm gonna add this whole podcast to my Tinder bio. If you want to know who I am.
But you have like, because you can read Vonnegut.
Yeah.
And look at his grammar, and it's completely screwed, and like it's all over the place. And then you can look at Cormac McCarthy, and it's like you read a whole page, and there's 3 periods, no commas. You know what I mean? And so it's like, it's grammatically true. It's like it's like grammar is this like meta thing that is informing standard English, which is the thing that is apprised and like looked at as like, if you can speak standard English, you're an articulate, intelligent person. Right. And then all of the different articulations and dialects and vernaculars that we use, be it like in my community and in other communities, people often look at that as if it's independent of this meta concept of grammar, because it's not the same as standard English, whereas it's still following Chomsky's idea of like, we have a language muscle in our brain, and it utilizes grammar in order to make sense of how we communicate with one another. This is highbrow shit, bro.
Which is really interesting because, like grammar has created this and especially Western grammar, right? And I worked at the Writing Center, and when I worked at the Writing Center at Virginia Tech, I had a ton of international students who would come in, and at the end of the day, like, there's no good reason why Western English language has articles. They just were literally like the B and the A, like they don't exist in a ton of other languages. And so what you find out is like, it's just another way to create otherness, right? Yeah. Like if you don't understand the articles, then you're a part of the other world, which is a huge,
get it.
Yeah, it's a huge discourse.
You just don't get it. You're uneducated. There's something wrong with you. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I think it's oftentimes the point of language historically, like how to say this is how we speak standardly, this is how we speak now. And I think it's really messed up in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, and so I took a linguistics class in college, and the biggest takeaway that I took from Paul Wachowski at RU, shouts out to Paul, was that the language of people in power is the one that's valued.
Yes.
And the language of people that aren't in that category, it's just everybody looks at it as like, you don't get it, you're uneducated, and inherently there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Because you can't get it. You can't speak the way we speak. You say ax instead of ask, so you must be stupid.
Yeah.
And that was the biggest takeaway. It like blew my mind open, because prior to that, you know, I grew up the way I grew up, and like, even though, you know, I go home and say things like, what y'all fitting to do? And you know what I mean? Like, I talk to people like that.
Yeah.
I never associated growing up that with other communities that have similar forms of vernacular that are distinct from standardized English. And then going into that class and being like, oh, this is the exact same thing as like saying fitting to.
Yeah.
Right? This is the same thing as saying y'all. This is the same thing as saying taters instead of potatoes. Do you know what I mean? It's the exact same thing. And like the Appalachian community that I'm a part of, like, has been not considered like, you know, a group of people that run the world, right?
Right.
And then same thing in the black community, same thing in immigrant communities.
Right.
So my kids just read Amy Tan's Mother Tongue. Have you read that?
Yes.
Fantastic, right?
Yeah.
And she really clearly, and if you're listening, read it. You can just Google the PDF, find Mother Tongue by Amy Tan. And like, her big takeaway is that, you know, my mom speaks quotation marks broken English, but she's clearly a smart woman. You know what I mean? And people, I don't know, man. What thoughts do you have on this? I'm sort of like chasing my own tail and repeating myself.
No, I mean, it is really interesting, right? Like, and as kids,
what do we do about this?
And I do think I always connect everything back to the classroom, right? And when we create these systems of language that basically are the ins and the outs, right? You're either in or you're out. And then you place that into a classroom setting, like, you really do a lot of damage to the kids who are living out in the sticks, or whatever you want to call it, like I did. And then you'd go, and then you'd have all the kids, preppy kids or the suburban kids, talking, and then you throw out your southern dialect or your farm dialect or your little pod.
All those preppy kids are co-opting black vernacular, though.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
well, it's mainstream social media, right?
Yeah, I guess that's probably what it is.
And that's and mainstream social media has a huge history of stealing from AAVE, African American Vernacular English. Mainstream culture, even the past like 5 years, has a huge taking away from like gay culture, right? Like, yes, queen, like, all of this stuff is and sometimes it's intersectionality sometimes too between AAVE and queer language, and so there's a lot of back and forth between that, but social media loves that.
So as you were saying that, it brought something up for me that I'd like to see what you think about it, because I've been thinking about, so in the yoga world, like I even mentioned it when we were doing fitness today, like so many of these things the Indians figured out 5,000 years ago. Yeah. Like how to move your body, how to sit, how to breathe, how to notice your experience, so that how to have concentrated practice of learning how to notice your experience, so that it becomes an unconscious trait that you bring into your daily life of just like being what the Buddhists call a householder. Yeah. Right. Just a person that's like working a job and taking care of kids. Right. And a conversation has been being had over the last decade or so in the yoga community of like, what is the difference between appropriating and sharing something that's valuable? And so I don't know where I land on that. And I had a conversation with a senior yoga teacher who's been teaching for decades. And this was her position, which is the innovations of humanity, be it linguistic, right? Like Yes Queen from the gay community, or you know, anything that comes from AAVE, which, thanks for sharing me that term. I've always used black vernacular, but AAVE makes more sense. What is the distinction between appropriation and celebration? And then also, are coming off of that claim from the senior yoga teacher that all of the innovations of humanity are for humanity to excel with.
Yeah. I think when it comes to appropriation, and it happens so frequently, I think what it is for me, and I'm just going to speak from like the gay community, is like, stop stealing from a culture that you're not helping the system fight for.
Okay.
You know, like, there's still a lot of places in America that it is not okay to be gay and go into certain places and don't even like think about trans or non-binary or anything like that. Like, and so when I think about people using terms from like queer language, I'm like, but how are you supporting me in a political system? How are you supporting me in social situations? How are you supporting me getting the rights that I deserve as a human? So I think it's a lot of that, right? So example, when you're talking about indigenous folks, right? If you are using the terminology, or if you are using the stuff that they used to do and how they learned about the land, like, how are we providing reparations for those communities? You know, like, is there another step that you're going to do, or are you just going to use their culture as a way to feel good about yourself, or as a way to be like, oh my gosh, I have a spirit animal, like that's actually cultural appropriation, because you're stealing from a culture that you're not supporting, like, and that you historically have not supported, being in a group of, say, white people. Like, us as white people have not done enough to provide reparations for these marginalized communities, and so I think about it in that respect a lot.
So it's like, take the tools, but like give back proportionally to what you've earned, or what you've taken, rather.
Yeah, same thing. Like, when we talk about Black history, like, okay, slaves are free. It's phenomenal, great. Okay, like, slaves are free, but like, you didn't provide the land that they've been working on for the past X amount of years. You were just like, hey, go. You didn't provide any sort of financial support, social support, systematic support. And so all of those things over the course of years, it's kind of like, hey, dude, like, you keep stealing from me and you like my culture, but you're not doing anything to support my shit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that perspective. That makes sense. And as you say that, I'm thinking about, what I'm thinking about is what I value about the studio that I work with and the yoga school that I teach for, specifically to the practice of yoga. Like, yes, we use the tools of yoga. We like, tomorrow I have to give like a 2-hour lecture on the history of yoga. The yoga school that I teach for is actually really mindful about this, and using like Sanskrit, where most people would otherwise be using English. We try to utilize that as much. I'm not sharing this as like a form of display, but I'm just sharing this because it's like coming up for me, because like what you said actually resonates with what we've been up to. So we also teach the history, and then a percentage of the proceeds that we not proceeds, but like the cash payments for the yoga teacher trainings goes directly to these orphanages in India, which is really cool. And I'm super grateful for that. And so when I started teaching with the Kunga Yoga School, they had like 7 orphanages or so. And then we've just been collecting money and sending it over and like helping them out. Now they have like 21 orphanages for young girls in India, which is just insane. It's like thousands of kids that have lived the most hellacious experiences that you think a kid could experience. And now they have a community predominantly of women. And the cool thing about this program is that it's Homes of Hope Orphanage. I actually put a link in the show notes, so if you want to donate to them, they're a really great organization. But they, when the girls graduate, like, you get done with your education, there's always an opportunity for them to come back and feed the system. And so it's like this growth that's become exponential, because the girls, it started out with one school. The guy's name is escaping me who started it. I'll write that in the thing. But he started it. Obviously, you start with one, and then the girls get through the program, and they're like, okay, so what do we do? Like, we're done. We're educated. They have like emotional support stuff. They have therapeutic stuff. They have, but in some of these really remote spots, so like Kunga Fest, which is a festival that we do at the yoga studio every year. 2 years ago, we raised enough money to provide clean. So some of these are super remote. Like, some of these spots are super remote. And India is a massive country. and they didn't have clean drinking water.
Right.
They didn't have reliable drinking water. And the people of this town came to the yoga studio I teach at Imbalance, and they donated enough money to provide a clean drinking facility for like over 100 young girls.
Oh, heck yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Like a bunch of yogis, like a bunch of hippies in the mountains of Appalachia,
Yeah.
like, raising money. And it's like at $5 at a time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not even, and you know, a lot of people come to the classes and they're like, I got $2, I'll give you $2.
Yeah.
And they come to the class and then it aggregates together. I think we raised like 10 grand 2 years ago.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's so cool, man. But the kids, like when they have schools attached to it that boys go to as well, because you know, just like any orphan kid needs protection, but specifically the young girls because of, you know, sex trade and like all these really like terrible things that you can imagine. They have the educational program for both boys and girls. The orphanages are independent and they're just female, and then they feed back into the system. So it's like it just keeps growing. It's like I get an email every like 4 months. It's like, oh, we're breaking ground on a new spot, you know? Yeah,
that's interesting.
It's super cool, man. Yeah. I'm curious about what you think about, because we can go as long as you want to,
Sure.
but one thing we haven't talked about is why you're going back to school.
Yeah.
So let me share real quick. So I told my kids.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, on Saturday, because I do a gratitude list every Friday. It's like, I'm grateful for blank because blank, and then they just write for 3 minutes, right? And I said, I'm grateful for my weekend because I'm going to go work out with Mr. Whitten, and then we're going to do a podcast together. And so I share it, like I write it, and then I share it just to like model behavior. And the kids like got fired up.
Yeah.
They were like, Mr. Whitten. So I share that to tell you that like your presence was valued at the school. And so, not to like say come back to the school, but like I'm just curious, like, because you seem to like fit in there. You seemed like you were doing something good. So like there must be something on the horizon for you that you're looking for. So why go back to school?
So there's a few different things that played out, right? And it was never like the kids. The hardest day of my entire teaching career was the day I told my students that I wasn't going to be back next year.
Mm-hmm.
It was terrible. But number one,
did you cry?
No.
Have you ever cried in front of your kids?
No.
I have.
Number one, like there is.
You didn't even ask me when I cried. Am I offended that you didn't ask me?
Did you like?
It's my podcast, bro.
Was it like a hot mess of a cry? Or was
no,
it
was like a little
cry?
teary thing. We'll talk about it later.
Oh, that's not bad.
I didn't mean to co-opt the other thing.
Oh no, you're good.
And then my mic fell. So I gotta hold it now.
On a basic level, Virginia Tech offered me a full ride.
Oh, cool.
Which, when you think of the grand scheme of like how education plays out, like if someone's paying
for your PhD?
for it, yeah,
really,
someone's paying for it and giving you a stipend to live off of, like at the bottom line, that matters.
Oh,
you know?
yeah.
It matters to a lot of people, especially when you don't have the best financial background, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that is not the reason fully of going back.
But that's a solid motivator.
But it is.
It is a solid motivator. You'll be more effective if you come back to the classroom or like whatever the next step is.
And anyone that tells you that that's not a motivator for going back, like I'm like that's a huge factor, man.
Mm-hmm.
And at least own it, right? A lot of people don't have that experience. So there was that. And
yeah,
then,
you don't have kids. You don't have a partner. Like you're not married. Like you just like you can do your thing. You know. I don't know how I would do that though. Like I would have to. Go ahead. I'm bringing the conversation back to myself, as I always do. That's why I'm so egotistical to have a podcast.
Like we go back to how we respond to our lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
The yo-yo of teaching during COVID illustrated to me a lot of things that I had already known, but the frustrations I think were a lot greater this go round. Like how we treat our teachers and how we kind of go back and forth between like, oh, let's do this. The fact that you send out surveys and then don't listen to the results of the survey to the population that's greatly being affected, which are the students and the teachers. If you're not listening to those types of surveys, it's really problematic at the end of the day. And so I started thinking about all those things, and then Virginia Tech reached out to me, and then after that I was like, you know, Clint, there's this big piece of research that is out there that not a lot of people want to touch, and that is what queerness looks like in middle school rural spaces. Like queer and rural, oh god, like talking about queerness in middle school, oh god, like, and so all those intersectionalities, I was like, it's going to be a lot of trauma for me to go back because obviously I was queer and I was closeted in a rural space. And I knew in middle school, so I'm like, I need to check myself into like therapy as I go through this PhD program.
I had to leave work early the other day to meet with my therapist.
Yeah. And so I was like, Clint, people need to be talking about this because I don't give a shit. Like if you think that you don't have people in the queer community in your classrooms, like you do. You do.
I teach 110 kids a year.
You do.
They're there.
Yeah.
And some of them are open.
And some of them are closeted. Yeah. And so I thought about it and I was like, maybe it's time, 3 years, take some time, look into these spaces. And honestly, it is. The professors have been asking us this week, they're like, all right, what's your name? What's your program? What do you hope to do after you graduate? And so my answers have been pretty honest. I was like, my name is Clint Whitten. Like, I'm in the Foundations of Education program. I was like, I'm going to wing it after. I don't really know what I'm going to be doing after. I said, but it's going to be doing something to support LGBTQ plus students in spaces that they don't feel comfortable in. And I think that doing that type of work is really important because the queer kids are the kids that help me come out,
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Like those kids, and I always say that my students were the straw that broke the camel's back of me coming out in general. And so I don't know. I know the trauma of going through school and not getting to be yourself, but knowing who you are.
Yeah.
And so,
and from hearing from what you said, sort of like pushing against that or hiding it, like overtly hiding it, but then also like talking about the positivity towards your body, yourself, your creativity from the earlier part. Like there's probably some stuff in there. It was like, I actually don't want this to be the case in this moment, maybe.
And it's so interesting because I was on a set of a commercial last week or the week before last.
What were you on the set of a commercial for?
I just do everything.
You live so many lives, bro. It's so crazy.
I was on the set of a commercial and I was talking to this parent and, I was talking about the trans policy that's happening across Virginia. And she got really defensive and she was like, well, I just don't think anything like that should be taught in school. And I quickly responded and I said, well, like, Romeo and Juliet's taught in 9th grade. Historically. I think it's even getting kind of pushed down a little bit further now in some schools. I was like, Romeo and Juliet is one of the sexiest novels. Plays that you can read.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, if we think about the stories that are being taught, if there are going to be relationships, they're very heteronormative, right? And then, this is my favorite thing I did, because I made a TikTok on it.
You don't need to follow. You don't need to follow his TikTok because it's exploded. But what's your TikTok, Clint Whitten?
It's CDW615.
CDW. Okay. What a stupid name.
Dude, it was
How
COVID,
did you get any followers?
It was COVID, and I just was bored.
So you made the TikTok. I just sidetracked you. You made the TikTok video after.
And I didn't want it to be the same username as my Instagram because I knew that my TikTok would be public. And so I made this whole thing, and all I did was a quick Google search. Middle school short stories, period. Okay. And you get the lottery. You get the Telltale Heart. You get the Dangerous Game. You get what's the other one that was on there? There's like a couple of other ones. And what I really found out in that literally like 60-second TikTok, I was like, we are so comfortable talking about all these violent acts.
The Most Dangerous Game is about a guy who hunts humans.
Literally,
the Telltale Heart
like,
is he
getting
dismembers this guy.
The lottery,
and
a girl
him.
Gets stoned to death.
Yeah.
And like these are stories that in middle school curriculum we're like, like it engages the kids. Yeah. And I'm like, y'all are so comfortable talking about that you're uncomfortable talking about sexuality.
That is such a good argument.
Like you're that uncomfortable about sexuality that you'd rather talk about murdering people in
I mean, for example, they teach family life stuff like right before winter break. Yeah. And they're like, okay, now go home, figure it out. Like if you have questions, ask your parents.
I have a whole separate like rant about sex ed and
and so like we had a cursory level conversation about how they don't teach anything about LGBTQ plus. Like it's just completely
if it is not reproductive and if it's outside of abstinence, then you're gonna die.
Yeah.
You're gonna die.
I think so. In my head, I've always thought so there's there's a question I want to ask, and then my thought about why people. Actually, I have two questions. So maybe I'll get them both out and I'll remember them. But the first thing is, I think that people are very uncomfortable thinking about sexuality when it comes to. Can I have more wine?
Of course.
When it comes to anybody under the age of 18,
yes.
right? I think it makes them extremely uncomfortable, any capacity of sexuality. And so I think that the LGBTQ plus conversation has been completely, hey, here's to you, Bubba, has been completely marred by puritanical fear of, like, if we talk about this, then they're going to start doing this.
Right.
And I think that's where it comes from. And I don't think that that's the right place, because to your point, I think you made the perfect counter argument.
Yeah.
Was like, we're talking about Edgar Allan Poe's narrator just membering a guy.
Yep.
Definitely going through schizophrenia.
Yep.
And it's like celebrated for its
All Summer in a Day
prose.
was in there.
Oh yeah.
A girl gets trapped in a closet, and this is like a huge moment in life. Like, we're okay talking about that type of shit. Like,
yeah. And so it's not even, doesn't even have to be violent. It could just, well, there is violence in that. They like bully her into the closet, but. And that kid in that story, read all these stories. If you haven't read these stories, like, get your life. Yeah. You got, these are worth reading, even as an adult. But All Summer in a Day is like, Margot is struggling. She is struggling, and I actually teach that story, and I teach that story because it's an opportunity to show the kids, like the conversation of, you might not notice this, and you might be in a situation. You know what, Clint? Hopefully I'll remember the questions that I wanted to ask you, because I've already lost them, but maybe they'll come back to me. One of the things that I've noticed about my life is that there were stretches of time where I was the kid that would have put Margot in the closet.
Oh yeah.
I would have been. I was a football player. I had this like sense of like, that's how I express my manhood, because I didn't really have. I think that young men are always looking for an example of what it means to be a man, right? And probably the same for women, and probably people non-binary. Like, it's gender play, it's not my experience, and so I can't speak to that, but I can speak to my experience, which is I didn't know what it was like, and so I get on the football team, and I see these guys that are stronger than me, faster than me, have more attention than me, and they're behaving this way.
It's youth gender performance.
Youth gender performance.
Yeah. It's we are trying to perform these gender norms that we are expected by society to live up to.
But I think there's beauty in the masculinity that I've defined for myself.
100%.
I think that the man that I am now is a completely different person, and it's come through the things that I've experienced. Yeah. And I think that I mean, this isn't necessarily a conversation about masculinity, but I do appreciate that there are traits in me that I value. But I would have been that guy. I would have been that guy. I mean, I would have put Margaret right in the closet.
Same here.
And she would get out of the closet and be like, whatever, dude.
I was doing everything in high school to perform straight. And so I'll never forget, in political science, we had to do a whole campaign. And one of my campaign things in high school, knowing that I was gay, I would look across the classroom and I would say, well, I just like don't really care what they do, referring to queer people. I don't really care what they do, but I just like don't think they should get married like in a church, because that's like sanctionary. Like,
I don't know why anybody.
Like, what the hell am I thinking? Like, now?
Yeah, right.
Like, I'm like, Clint, you really said that, and like, now here you are.
You'll have to bring that up to your therapist.
Right. And now here I am, like, very out, like, and I think there's a lot of health that comes into me being out. And as you were saying, masculinity versus femininity, which is a huge point of discourse in the queer community, and there are spaces that, as a person who can present masculine energy, I feel more comfortable in, versus other spaces where a queer person might not feel comfortable in. And so I think I think masculinity and femininity are really interesting topics of how students in schools are trying to perform to that social norm.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I think that the conversation around the binary nature of masculinity and femininity creates problems, because I have feminine traits, and there are parts of me that are considered traditionally feminine, and I enjoy experiencing those things. And my masculine stuff too. So I want to get back to the question that I actually was thinking about. So in a previous podcast, I was asking Ryan, who's another teacher that you and I both know, And we were talking about, because he's speaking today at, what time is it? In like 3 hours, so we got to wrap this at some point so I can go take a shower after this workout before.
Dialogue on race.
Yeah, dialogue on race today. And so that's actually my first time going. I'm super excited. And I didn't know he was speaking until like we did the podcast, which is cool.
Yeah.
But I asked him this question because, you know, I've been part of, like, you guys had a book club, and I've been in different, like the yoga studio has put on different conversations about race specifically, and the queer community, and just these different conversations. And one of the things that I can't figure out is there are people in the world who are not bad people, who have thoughts that don't agree with the conversation. They're not the type of folk that would go to the dialogue on race, but it doesn't mean that they're racist.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there are people who think, the people that think that there shouldn't be a conversation about trans kids in schools, or non-reproductive sexual activity in schools, those people aren't inherently bad. I don't think that they're bad people.
Yeah.
I don't think, and so what the question is how do we, and this isn't something you probably, maybe you've thought about it, maybe you haven't, and I sort of got an answer from Ryan, and I've just been asking all the people that I know that because these people are in my life.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are people that I know that they're like, well, of course gay people are fine, but like as soon as you start choosing your pronouns, it's like, you're crazy. You know what I mean? Like, I know these people. And then in the same thing of like talking about CRI, like people, or CRT rather, critical race theory, like people are like, you're indoctrinating our kids to make all the young white boys want to kill themselves. Do you know what I mean? And so they're not necessarily bad people. And I don't know how to bridge the gap between bringing the conversation to them in a capacity that they're willing to actually hear it.
Right.
Because I don't pretend to know these things, right? Like you've been teaching me things for the last 40 minutes, through your experience and through your like work of understanding. And that's one of the reasons I want to do the podcast, is so that I can continue to learn things. But that's because I'm an open person, right?
Right.
And I may not agree or disagree with everything that I hear from all the people that I have conversations with, but some people just won't have conversations, and I don't know how to start that.
I often think of it as like almost like a, if not now, when? You know, like kids are in school so much of their lives until they're 18.
Oh yeah, dude.
Like so much.
Oh yeah.
Like more time than they're at home probably. And if they are at home, they're doing their own thing, they're hanging out with their friends, like, and so I think school has got to be this place of like, we're gonna learn what a metaphor is, but you know what, also we need to learn how to process the human condition, right? How to explore the human condition, what makes us tick, what makes us motivated, what makes us feel safe, what makes us feel comfortable, what love looks like, right?
What scares us?
How
does it feel to be anxious?
And so when I think about the people that are like, well, I don't know if that needs to be taught, or the pronoun thing, I'm like, but why does it matter to you? Like, if you're that closed off, then why are you so upset when someone chooses a new pronoun for themselves?
I think it's because it attacks their sense. I think that, so this is something that I've taken from the yoga traditions, right? So in Buddhist philosophy, through meditation practice, you understand that your thoughts are not you. You are not your thoughts. In the same way, like right now, you're sitting here and your heart is beating. You're breathing. You never identify with your heart. You are not your heart. You're not your breath. And just like the heart beats and the lungs breathe air, the brain can't help but think thoughts. But there's a distinct quality to thoughts that we associate them with who we are, where I think we have a deeper essence, which just like the grammar conversation earlier, and I'm not a religious person, but I do think that there's like a piece of that that's involved, just like the grammar conversation earlier. It's like this meta existence of the one, and I think that people often, like these flutters, they think they are them.
And we also talk about like everyone's on their own journey, right? And let me tell you, the amount of stairs I've had to walk up, walk back down, walk up and walk back down for certain people is, I've been on a stair stepper my whole life. And so even the people that have been super closed off at the middle school that I've worked at and done a lot of stuff with, I always try to find some type of like teeny bit of like, there's that little rice grain that you do understand it. And I see that you understand it. And so here's how we can kind of move from that. Like example, Ryan Wade, who is mixed, and then me, who is an outwardly gay teacher. We're talking to this faculty member, and we're talking about like, you know, like life is kind of messed up for these minority groups. Like it just is, like end period. And she was very much like, I just like don't think so. Like I like don't see that. And finally I was like, girl, like really, like seriously, like there are places that I feel uncomfortable going into as a queer guy. Like Ryan, like there are places where he feels uncomfortable going in because he is a mixed guy. Like this just exists. Like sorry. And so she finally said, which cracks me up so much, she goes, well, there was this one time I was in college and I was getting observed by my teacher, my university supervisor, and she goes, and I'm pretty sure he deducted points because of my accent. And I was like,
but that's where she could access that concept,
exactly. It was
right?
where she could access it, and all I did was shake my head and say, see, exactly, you understand that. And in my head, I'm like, this woman is talking to a queer guy and a half black guy, and I'm like, But
and that's
so
where she can access
you do.
it. It's like, it's in like the fitness practice we did this morning. We're talking about like, oh, Metcons are infinitely scalable. The yoga practice that I teach, it's infinitely scalable. You just meet people where they are, I guess is the takeaway. And if it's your accent,
I'll go with it, man.
we start there.
I'll go with it.
I think one last thing I want to ask you, because I know that a handful of teachers do listen to this podcast, and what do people that are in leadership roles, be it education or like I know of, people listen that have an opportunity to make choices that can be more inclusive, and I think conversation is part of that, but the conversation of like, for example, if you're in a classroom, if you have not considered these things, you'll be extremely clumsy and probably say some things that are like problematic, just trying to honestly explore it.
Sure.
And so I think that that's like a level 3 move. Yeah. I think that there are subtle things. Like I have like a pride flag in my room. I try to decorate my room in a multicultural way. I try to expose kids to literature that's different than my experience or maybe their experience. So those are sort of my like subtle. I mean, they're overt, but they're like less involved with me standing in front of the room and trying to articulate the complexities of being a more equitable person and a more equitable community. So do you have any thoughts on like what are, just to like as we wrap, like what are conscious things that people could do that don't require them to have clear articulation on these things?
Yeah, and a lot of the things that you were saying are great, you know. My biggest thing is if you are a teacher who is lesson planning or coming up with curriculum, and if the first thought in your head is not like, I have about 115 social identities that I need to find something for them to connect to. I don't care if it is the one kid that's in the back of your room that is trans. Like, hey, find a trans text because that one kid needs to feel represented. Like, and so a lot of it can come through literature. Mathematicians, when it comes to math classes, like have a space in your wall where you have a bunch of queer math folks, and it's not so much you have to sit there and be like, hey guys, like let's look at this wall and let's talk about all these people. You don't have to talk about these things, right? Like just for them existing. Example, this year I was teaching makeup for theater. I would be stupid not to use drag queens to teach makeup.
Oh yeah, I remember you did that.
Like I would be stupid, and I don't have to have the conversation like, hey, these are drag queens, these are men who perform and dress as queens. Like I don't have to do that. I say, hey guys, like we're gonna learn about makeup today, we're gonna do contouring stuff. I have a tutorial. This drag queen, Jan from New York, she's gonna show us how to do makeup in this like 5-minute tutorial, period. Simple. I don't even need to have conversation around it. And the kids are so interesting. They'll type in the comments or they'll talk in class. They're like, I think they're trying to become a woman. And I'm like, hey, but that makeup's really good though, right?
It's fire.
And so it is those subtle things, right? Like having queer folks, not even in your classroom, but around your pod and your hall, like represented. And then like, dudes, check your policies. Okay, like for 3 or 4 years of me teaching, every day or at the beginning of every school year or during the faculty book club, I would always bring up our school policy because sexuality is not mentioned in it. They'll talk about gender, they'll talk about race, they'll talk about socioeconomic status and all of those moments, but sexuality is never, like, control F that thing, like type in sexuality, it's non-existent. And so policy is a huge thing, and creating those safe places where, like, hey, like, we're gonna do this club and you can come or not come, like, that's a subtle thing that you can do. And so in science class, like, there's so many queer scientists that explore so many different things. And so I think what it really comes down to is you can't be a teacher and say you love all of your students if you are not actively making the conscious choice to represent all of your students. Right?
Boom.
And it takes time and it's hard, but here's the thing that drives me insane. Like, the resources are there. Like, reach out to the queer teacher. And I'm not saying that as a queer teacher I need to be everything that's queer, right? Like, that's not all me. Same thing for Ryan Wade. Just because he is the mixed teacher doesn't mean everything race needs to go to him. However, like, I do have resources, and I type up stuff and I send it out, and I don't mind doing that. Like, I just have cultivated these things. It's my research. It's my passion.
Ideally, we'd find a situation where it's like, well, see, here's the, I don't know. I don't want to rev back into something else as we are bringing it to a close. But I think it's important for people that aren't part of a community, be it queer or BIPOC, like whatever it is. I think it's important, like, for someone that looks like me and has preferences like me. Yeah. I don't think that it's necessarily a good idea to always be reaching out to your gay friends or your black friends or your Asian friends.
You have to be comfortable in your own discomfort, right?
And then on the other side of that, I agree with that. But just to, like, button this point, on the other side of it, it's like, I can't take agency over these things I don't own. Yeah. So it's like it's this thing that, like, is almost unsolvable for someone. It's not that it's almost unsolvable. It's a challenging problem to address. Of, like, how do I gather thoughts, resources, and linguistic tools so that I can do this without exacerbating all of my friends that aren't cis heteronormative white dudes, without appropriating all their stuff. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think it is kind of like that. Listen, at the end of the day, you got to learn this stuff for yourself sometimes. Yeah. Like, you just got to do your own Google, your research, I mean, that's what we teach our kids all the time. Like, hey, if you don't know the answer to something, look it up. Figure it out. Like,
I'm giving you the tools of critical thinking and adult, language, so now go figure it out. Yeah.
And like I said, the idea of, like, being comfortable in your discomfort, but also it's okay to make a mistake. If you have a kid who is transitioning or is using their pronouns and you mess it up, be honest. You know, be like, I am so sorry I used your dead pronouns. Like, I will make sure I make a mental note.
I think that's the biggest fear for people.
I got you.
Is saying the wrong thing. Yeah. I think, and you hear this with really conservative, talking heads. It's like, AKA cancel culture kind of thing. Like, people are terrified of that. Oh, and 100%. I think that on the whole, if you're a genuine person and you recognize, like, oh, actually, I made a mistake. Like, this didn't sound right, and this wasn't in my heart. And the tools that I was using linguistically didn't represent what I actually feel, and I apologize that they came out that way.
Now, if you keep making the mistake,
you just keep banging away at it, right? That's a different story. Yeah. Clint, I think that the thing you said like 5 minutes ago, which is you can't say that you love all your students if you're not trying to show them representation. I think that is the biggest takeaway for me. Yeah. And I think that everybody can have the opportunity. And again, this expands past education. This is an education podcast. It goes into fitness, it goes into yoga, it goes into all these places, business, all of it. I think I just love that idea. Yeah. I'm happy we did this, man.
What?
I'm happy we did this.
Oh, 100%.
I can hear my voice in here. So I'm like, like I said, I'm sultry in the mic. Yeah, man, we'll do this again.
Wine, queer, fitness. That's my jam.
Wine, queer, fitness.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do it.
It's way to my heart. That's the Tinder profile right there.
That's the name of your podcast. Wine, queer, fitness.
Yeah. Oh God.
Well, look, man, thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Anytime.
All right, brother.
Yeah.